Hey Voyagers, welcome back to VFTV, Vibes from the Void, Episode 3, technically Episode 2, Part 2?
Yes.
We'll call it Episode 3. And in the last episode, we were discussing cosmic horror and Lovecraft's influence on modern fiction and media today. And we were talking about... what were we talking about, Molly?
Stranger Things, season 4.
Stranger Things.
Vecna.
Okay, so
Which I just read because of your lovely wife. Was not CGI at all. They actually ended up having to do, I think, like 3.5 hours of special effects makeup on whatever that actor's name is.
Oh, it's all like makeup and prosthetics?
Yeah.
Oh, no way. I never would have guessed that. It does look like CGI.
Right. It was very good. I'm actually kind of jealous. I wish I had that kind of artistry.
No kidding. Where we last left off, we were talking about Vecna as he is kind of similar to Nyarlathotep as he is Nyarlathotep to the Mind Flayer's Azathoth. Like, he's a direct projection of his will, where the Demogorgon and who is it that somebody puts it, they compare the Demogorgon to being like a stormtrooper or a foot soldier, your basic cannon fodder,
yes,
if you will. And Vecna is the Mind Flayer's, we called him a 3-star, 4-star general.
Right.
And so he's the one who is pulling strings as a direct avatar of the Mind Flayer's will. Whereas Nyarlathotep does that as a projection of Azathoth's nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just, and this is going to take up just a few minutes. I'm not going to go off the rails with it, but I do want to, that relates directly to the Magnus Archives.
Yes.
Which, as I mentioned in episode 2, is a horror fiction podcast distributed by the Rusty Quill Network. And you can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, rustyquill.com. Great series. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out. So the Magnus Archives centers around an institute called the Magnus Institute, where people go and report paranormal things they've witnessed or been victimized by. And it turns out that every single thing that's reported can be tied back to one of 14 major fears. And these fears are all fed, like we were talking about it in the last episode, how it's fed by people's fear. These fear gods, these eldritch gods, they're fed by terror, and not just humans' terror, also animals' terror.
Oh yeah.
So the major ones, and I don't think I'm going to remember all of them offhand. I may, but there are 14, and there's suspected that there's a 15th power emerging. So they are the End, which is the fear of death, the Corruption, which is the fear of disease or filth or insects. There is the Flesh, which is actually a fear that's fed by the fear of animals, fearing being raised purely to be slaughtered. There is the Spiral, which is the fear of insanity, or the world you know is not what it is, or being deceived. There's the Web, which is the fear of being controlled and being not sure whether the decisions you're making, the actions you're taking, are actually your decisions or intentional actions. There's the Desolation, which is the fear of fire. There is the Slaughter, which is the fear of war or just mindless violence, mass shootings.
Mm-hmm. Pure chaos.
There's the Dark, which is obviously the primordial fear of the dark, which is funny because that ties back to H.P. Lovecraft's mankind's oldest and strongest emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. So that ties in with the Dark. There's the Hunt, which is the fear of being hunted down or being prey by something that's stronger than you. Yeah. There's the Buried, which is the
confined spaces.
Yeah, small spaces, being buried alive. it's also called the too close I cannot breathe. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the vast, which is the fear of large spaces, or the void. So be it the abyss of the cosmos, or
That one SpongeBob episode.
yeah, or the open, uncaring maw of the abyss of the ocean. It's just the fear of like too much space. There's actually an episode called Free Fall in season 1 where a guy is essentially, he's swallowed by the sky, and I can only imagine is doomed to fall directionless and helpless for all of time. Then there's only a few more, but there is the Stranger, which is fun because that fear is actually based on a psychological phenomena known as the uncanny valley, which is a human seeing something that resembles a human, but something about it is wrong. So the Stranger is also called the I don't know you.
Right.
And
very Skinwalker-esque.
Yeah. They have a creature that's a direct avatar of the Stranger that they call the Not Them, where it will replace somebody in everybody's lives, and nobody seems to notice. And there's always one person, it seems, that does notice the difference, but they look different, they sound different, they dress differently, they have different mannerisms, and they're just, nobody notices.
Right.
So that's kind of a freaky thing. Like Invasion of the Body Snatchers almost.
Oh god, yeah.
But it's to the point like they'll even replace the image of that person they replace in photos and social media and everything. It's pretty nuts. But anyway, so there are people, and I have a point with this. That's not all of the fears, that's most of them, but there are people who act as agents of these fears, and these people, they're called avatars, and their whole thing is to feed their patron god. So if it's the end, they would have to basically just kill people to
feed the monster.
To feed the fear, the fear of death, the end.
Yes.
Or, the desolation, they'd have to burn people. The spiral, the avatars just drive them crazy. Like, they'll get them lost in a side dimension or a pocket dimension, or they'll deprive them of sleep in one instance until they just go absolutely nuts.
Absolutely.
So that's
just like Vecna.
Yeah, or Nyarlathotep, whose whole thing is they exist to torture people,
Create
to feed something
chaos.
bigger than themselves.
But in turn, they are connected to that, which is bigger than themselves, which I've always seen it as a family unit. Again, the father, the son, the pet.
Yeah, and it's actually, it's almost like a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Because the fear gives the avatar their initial power, but the stronger the fear is, based on what the avatar is feeding it, the avatar in turn also becomes more powerful.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely a give and take kind of, Venom and Tom Hardy type of situation.
Yes.
But what was there something else specifically that you wanted to talk about in regard to
the fears?
Yeah.
I know that Sabrina also, because I just rewatched season 3, which at the end of season 3, it was, where was it? It's whenever Faustus Blackwood, he ends up summoning the Eldritch Terrors to Greendale with the giant clear egg that he got in Scotland. And that also goes into season 4, which then you get like the weird, the strange, the dark, all those voids from H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And there was one that really stuck with me, and that was the weird. And it manifests as a hive-minded tentacle parasite, which, again, is like Cthulhu or Cthulhu's minions, whichever one you want to put it as. But this one also, he uses drowned bodies from a Trojan horse to gain entry into the Spellman mortuary to begin with. The weird then enters Sabrina with the aim of siphoning her power and preying on the world to offer nourishment to the void, which again is an H.P. Lovecraft write-off. So all of season 4 just entails of episode by episode of her going through and fighting these eldritch terrors, which I think is pretty awesome. But at the same time, I think it was very adolescent the way that they portrayed it in my eyes. But other than that, I mean, it was a really good spin on it.
That's true. And man, I love the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
It was rad.
And I'm glad we can talk about this because we didn't really have time to cover it in the last episode. But there's also another specific tie to Lovecraftian fiction in season 2.
Yes, that's where it started. I think that's whenever they were like, oh, we can actually make money off of this if we take it this direction.
Yeah, okay.
Even though it was based off the comic book.
Well, okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's all about that almighty dollar, baby.
I see you, Netflix.
But no, in all seriousness, there's an episode in season 2 where a Eldritch, I guess you could say that.
I think she's more like the cockroach of the cosmos, like just playing her, card in it. Like, I know that I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I'm a dabble with it.
A card. I see what you did. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this elderly lady comes to town and sets up shop doing tarot readings at Dr. Cerberus's shop, which is a comic shop. They do like coffee, milkshakes. They have comics and stuff. It's a general hangout for the kids in Greendale.
It's a cool spooky place we never got.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty miffed about that.
It's like if Books A Million was even
cool,
more geared towards nerds.
Yes. Or Game Goblin. Like if they two like met and had a baby, I think it'd be,
oh, that would be super cool.
It would, wouldn't it? I miss playing Pokemon at Books A Million, I'm not gonna lie.
So this lady sets up shop, she's doing tarot readings. In Harvey's reading, Harvey Kinkle, forever the love interest in Sabrina, he gets a reading about what would happen if I choose to attend this summer camp for artists and art students this summer, and it goes into its own little cutaway. It's all of the readings she does are like a little short chapter of the episode, and his roommate, it turns out, if he were to go, his roommate is very, very heavily based on H.P. Lovecraft. He's basically Lovecraft born again. And so he's kind of strange. He keeps odd hours. He draws these really kind of macabre, like dark creatures and just generally spooky, fucked up shit that, your average person, it's not the type of art that your average, I mean, can you really say there's such thing as an average artist?
No, there's not.
I mean, it's not
typical. You can though.
Okay, it's not the thing your typical artist would draw.
Which in turn didn't he end up actually doing all the drawing at the Gates of Hell?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
A little connection.
So this kid that Harvey ends up roomed with, it turns out that at night he has the ability to stare directly into the void and see all these horrific things that he's drawing and that influences his art. And there's what it's basically like, I don't want to say a portal, but maybe a porthole, a window into the void that opens in. It's in his closet, right?
Yeah, it's a keyport then.
And yeah, he just sits there and he looks into it and he draws all these monstrosities that he sees, and that is definitely
a nod to H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, absolutely,
because that's how he's viewed as one of the very few humans in the world that could look, quote unquote, into the void
or
and
beyond
not feel,
the veil.
Yeah, and not be crushed by that. That's supposed to be like his superpower.
Right. He's a little nuts, but it can't drive him totally insane.
No, right. Like he's just dealing with his demons. No medicine. Nothing. Just raw dogging it.
Raw dogging madness.
Man. I'd be a little intimidated.
For real though.
I mean, the fact that he was a racist, not so much. But if I would have known just about the madness beforehand, yeah, I'd be a little off my rocker for him.
Yeah, definitely. And this is definitely a separate the art from the artist type of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows H.P. Lovecraft was a raging racist asshole.
But he got his. He didn't even really get famous, right, until after his death. Like he had a few
things that were generally acknowledged, but his influence was definitely more of a snowball effect.
Yeah.
Kind of not unlike Aleister Crowley, who was kind of infamous in his day. But then, like, everything that came from, like, Thelema and the Golden Dawn just snowballed out of control, you know, just in the decades following his death.
Absolutely.
Especially in the, there was a big occult rush, I guess, in the 80s.
Absolutely.
Where Crowley was very, very venerated. Then, of course, LaVey, after founding the Church of Satan in the 60s, was right there along with him. But that's also when Peter Carroll, who is seen as one of the biggest influences in what's known as chaos magic, that's when he published his big works, being Liber Null, or the Book of Nothing, and Psychonaut. And then he's got several others, but those were the two major influential ones. It's kind of just like, you know, dipping your toes into what is chaos magic.
Yes.
And that actually leads me to what I want to bring up next, talking about Lovecraft, is there are certain occult authors and certain occult circles out there today that use his mythos and his creatures as a point of focus for their practice, for their, you know, their occult order, whatever the hell you want to call it. One specifically I want to mention is S. Ben Kayin, that's Qayin, who wrote The Black Book of Azathoth. And it deals with, as far as I understand, I don't have the book. It's actually kind of a hard to come by tome these days. But it focuses on drawing power from the mental energy and fear that's generated by the idea of Lovecraft's mythos and his creatures. And so that's kind of an interesting thing, because chaos magic, they have what they call egregores, which are thought forms that exist on the mental plane or the astral plane, and these egregores are developed by just giving mental energy or worship or what have you to that idea until it becomes something that can be a well of energy to draw from. And that's also kind of reminiscent of like the cults in Lovecraftian fiction.
And actually it ties in with Lovecraft Country, the series on HBO Max, where they're pretty much like, I see it as, yes, they saw H.P. Lovecraft for what he was, but they wanted to take those stories and turn it back into something where they could produce a hero from, and take, in lack of a better word, take their power back, especially in the racial form. So with that series, it was really cool because not only are they going through and fighting all of Lovecraft's monsters and deities and all this stuff, they're also crushing everything that they should have been able to crush if they weren't, you know, under the guise of white people and slavery and all that good stuff. But if you go into the actual later part of that series, you see where they come up with, it is called the Order of the Ancient Dawn, which is a cult that is based off of power from a Lovecraftian being who happens to be a terrible white man. Which they end up defeating, and there's just so much that goes into it. Even the Garden of Eden. I mean, there's so many pinpoints that just directly correlate from this series to, again, something as big as Eldritch Terrors, or something as big and radical as... It branches off of that, and then, of course, political rights, and then there's also a touch of religion into it. which I think that they've given more of a broader spectrum of it's just not something you read in a good book, you know. It's something that you feel, it's something that's passed on to you from generations before, and I really think it's neat, and I love that series. And shame on you, HBO Max and your directors, for canceling that, because I would have watched a million more seasons of it.
I'm really glad that you watched that, because I mean, I figured there were some obviously like racial connotations there, and they touch on like sundown towns and stuff.
Yes,
right?
they do.
Stuff like that.
That's actually right out the gate, the first episode, and I like those things are meant to grab your attention. You know, if they're not, then you're not doing life right. So being able to see that and it fully immersed me into that experience, like I watched that within 24 to 48 hours. It was that good, you know, and I never do that with shows anymore, except for Stranger Things, but that's a different side of the spectrum.
So that's a plug right there. If you guys haven't watched Lovecraft Country,
Yes.
it was canceled, but I mean, hell, go watch it. It's probably much better than this podcast.
Yes. And I only say that on my behalf. I'm sorry, you guys. I am just a very dumb person cosplaying as someone who is minutely maybe smart.
I think we're going to call it there for episode 3. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to our nonsense. And
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Molly for coming out. And one more time, I do want to plug Quality Control Music on KUHS 102.5. That runs every Wednesday, 10 to 12 Central Standard Time here in Hot Springs. And one more time, it can be streamed 10 to 12 Central Standard Time. That's 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Central Standard Time on the website, which is
KUHSradio.org.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Sail safe, Voyagers. Until next time.